Hi everyone. If I'm lucky, this video might get a few hundred views, but honestly, most of my videos get like 40, 50, and I'm grateful for every view, but that's the reality. This is a small channel. Now, if I was Elon Musk, just saying a single syllable will get a million views. The point I'm making is that there are people out there with enormous influence, and that kind of relates to what I want to talk about. Just a little follow up from my last video on the awful murder of Irina Zarutska, the young Ukrainian woman killed in Charlotte. I have seen more footage of that, unfortunately. It is distressing to watch. Um, Brown stabs her in the neck and then leaves the train. I've now seen the other passengers. I hadn't seen that before. Um, there's a black woman, a black man, and another black man with it looks like headphones or something in a bit further behind. The first guy kind of gets up and leaves shortly after the killer, and they all look a bit shocked, but he does nothing. From what I could tell, the woman didn't really do anything either. Um, the thing I quoted from The Hill was about not judging bystanders. Well, what I would reiterate is I don't judge people for not wanting to confront an armed knife, like a deranged knifeman, because they'd be putting their own safety at risk. So I do understand that. What's less easy to understand, and where I think they don't warrant much sympathy, is the fact they just kind of went away. Um, they may not have seen exactly what happened, but they must have known something happened. I mean, the fact that their body language, the other passengers kind of back off, that makes it, they must have known something happened. So I think I still stand by the principle of what I was reading out from The Hill. I think it still stands, but um, as a general guideline, the original bystander effect, the New York Times has had to basically correct that what was based on the murder and rape of Kitty Genovese, young woman in Queens, New York City in 1964. Um, it was really sloppy journalism because it suggested that there were 38 witnesses who'd done nothing. Now they've corrected the record and said actually their own reporting was seriously flawed. But with every case like this, we see, huge criticism leveled at bystanders. Now, like I say, I've looked at the footage and I do think it's a bit questionable why they didn't do anything, and it's awful that this young woman effectively died alone. Although it has been said, and I haven't seen this part, that one man did actually try to put a blanket on her and try to stop the blood loss, but unfortunately at that point it was too late. I don't see him in the footage. Whether he was the man in the back or what, I'm not sure. There's some people race baiting on it, suggesting. I mentioned the thing about people might not have intervened from fear of racism. Well, the other passengers were black anyway, but people are suggesting, like, there's some racists coming out and suggesting basically this would never, you'd never get this from a white person. That's rubbish. A lot of the mass shootings in America are white perpetrators. So I think people need to just accept that criminals are black, white, Asian, and Hispanic. That's the reality. It's also been questioned, all the murals that are going out for Irina Sarutska. I mean, I think some of them are beautiful, and I think it's understandable, but there is an argument that that money could be maybe sent to her family or maybe sent to Ukraine. It's also worth noting on the race thing that Putin is a white man, and I don't even want to go into that race thing because it's toxic. It really is. But I've seen a lot of stuff online, and there are some racists coming out of the woodwork to try and imply that all black people are the same and they're all like this evil killer. That wasn't a gunshot. That's my new message. Let's see what this says. Um, yeah, I what I want to talk about though in this video is disinformation. disinformation is, in my opinion, one of the biggest problems in the 21st century. I mean, I really think it's a huge problem. And, there's a clash between this and censorship in the sense that there's a real balancing act. I'm broadly against censorship. I do share the frustration of those who see it happening. Some of my subscribers have brought this issue up. Well, I totally hear what you guys are saying because I share those concerns. But I'm also equally concerned about the sheer depth of disinformation that's out there. I mean, you see it. This also gets into the domain of AI, where AI can spread disinformation by its very nature. But this is everywhere, and both left and right get sucked into it. As an example, earlier today, I saw a photo of Farage and Trump at the Oval Office desk, and it was obviously from a left-wing source. And they were saying it must be fake because you can't see the reflection of Farage's suit on the desk, and they're showing Trump beside a woman. I'm not sure who she is, but you could see the reflection of her jacket on the desk. The implication being it's the Resolute desk that Farage is using Photoshop to fake himself being with Trump. But he was with Trump this week. He was in the White House. And I've seen other photos of that which do indeed show a reflection on the desk. It's enough that Farage is a Trump sycophant without having to make up that he's making up his visits to Trump. I just think the sheer depth of disinformation that's out there, people pushing agendas that don't really care about the truth, it's concerning. And it's from left and right. I would say, in my experience, it comes more from the right, but the left aren't immune to it. The left aren't immune from faking things and making things up either. People wonder why I'm so critical of Elon Musk. Well, Elon Musk is one of the most powerful people in the world, and he uses that influence more often than not to just spread lies, to just spread falsehoods. But people are I was going to say particularly in the Western world, but this is happening all over the world. I mean, look at the crisis in Nepal. Now 51 people dead. That's being called the Gen Z protest because it's led by very young people, even younger than millennials. In Indonesia, there's been protests. This year's also seen angry protests in Turkey. It's seen protests in Serbia. Not quite as widespread as the global protests in 2019, but we're seeing angry protests around the world. France now, with the collapse of the French government. And in Britain, indeed, we've seen protests. And we're seeing this flag thing. But, there's so many sites online, on social media, that are just so lacking in integrity. Just so lacking in any attempt to fact check themselves. But then again, maybe they just don't care because they're pushing an agenda. It's this hyper partisan era that we live in. There is genuine anger out there, and I'm not immune from that because I felt it myself. I felt real anger at the justice system, and I think that's well placed anger because I think that when judges are making decisions that affect people's lives, people have a right to be angry when they get those decisions wrong. And I think they should be a lot more accountable. I have long argued for institutional accountability. I believe that all institutions should be accountable, whether it be media outlets, in this country, the royal family, the military, the police, the government, of course. I believe in accountability of power. I've always believed in that. So the anger is not without basis, but I do find it very, very concerning just how much people are being taken in by what is clearly disinformation. And what I hope is that people would step back a little bit from their computer screens or their smartphone screens and just use a bit of common sense and just step back a little bit, just calm down a little bit. Because the number of people who are willing to believe in conspiracy theories, reckless conspiracy theories about all sorts of things, it's very concerning. because this is, when I see people, for example, saying, I'm talking about the UK context here, the revolution's just begun. And I saw this in relation to Nepal, because in the violence in Nepal, there was reports of ministers' homes being burned, and so now the situation in Nepal is not the same as the situation in the UK. Every country has a unique situation. So when I see people in the UK saying things like it's going to happen here next, and they're actually advocating it, it's concerning, because we will see violence if people keep inflaming it. People just need to chill the hell out and just step back a little bit. I mean, it's a very dystopian world where people spend all their waking hours trying to find out what the deep state is up to, or what our Bilderberg overlords are trying to do to destroy lives, or whatever else they believe. It's just, I don't know, I find it quite troubling that people are so taken in by this stuff. Now, I'm not saying that conspiracy theories are totally without basis. Most conspiracy theories have a degree of truth in them. And sometimes they turn out to be totally true. But more often than not, when you're talking about, for example, survivors of a mass shooting, them being harassed as crisis actors, being called crisis actors, the sheer level of delusion that people allow themselves to get into by toxic idiots like Alex Jones and others, I do find it very concerning. And it would be easy to dismiss these people, but they do have significant influence. That's why Donald Trump got back into power, partly. Because the MAGA movement, I think it's utterly toxic, but I do think it's effectively utilised social media. It certainly helped that Elon Musk, one of the world's most powerful people, who is in charge of X, the influence that he has can't be underestimated. Of course, now he's left MAGA and they've fallen out, but that's almost immaterial because the damage is already done. But you just look at some of these groups on Facebook and there's no accountability. There's no sense of self-regulation in the sense of taking some responsibility. It's just churning out nonsense. So much of it is baseless, and it's just concerning. We all need to try and be more objective, all of us, and I include myself. I mean, look at the thing about Irina Zarutska, what I've been talking about. I've discovered more details about that case than I previously knew. We have to all be humble enough to realise that we can't know everything at once. There's always more information to find out about a particular news story. But it does concern me that people are just endorsing hyperbole. They're endorsing just extreme notions of society that are not really the reality. I mean, it could be looked at that things are really not as bad as people think. And yet, this combination of anger and disinformation is really, really, really toxic. Last year's riots that spread across England were fueled by disinformation. So I'm going to address the point about how censorship plays into this, because I think governments, companies, etc. need to get a real balancing act. I happen to think that some forms of censorship are actually justified. I think of, for example, the incitement of violence. I think censoring that as a security method is actually very valid. Very valid. You can't have someone going around and saying, we need to attack this group of people or this individual, and think that that's perfectly okay, that it's somehow a legitimate part of free speech. So I actually agree with the Prime Minister that there has to be some common sense measures taken in terms of reining in on that. But when I say common sense, I mean explicit threats of violence. What shouldn't be censored is insults or people passionately disagreeing. I'm not even sure that I would censor disinformation per se, but what I would support, for example, is YouTube's been doing it, whereby, for instance, if you get a state broadcaster, they would put a little disclaimer under the video saying, this is the state broadcaster of whichever country it is. I have no problem with that because it isn't censoring it, it's just giving extra information. Of course, the old question is who gets to fact check the fact checkers? But where do you draw a line? I mean, it's I don't entirely trust mainstream media. I don't, because they have been exposed more often than not in pushing an agenda and in just plain falsehoods. And the BBC isn't immune from this. Or if not falsehoods, just sometimes they have failed, for example, to be proportionate in their coverage. But there is a human factor there. Human beings cannot always get it right. But I will say this, I know I appreciate my subscribers won't entirely agree with me on this, but I would trust some mainstream media more than I would trust certain independent media. I mean, I think there's independent journalists who have integrity and really do try to just work with the facts. But the fact of the matter is, there are also some people out there who they really don't give a damn about knowingly spreading disinformation. I mean, last year's riots didn't just come out of nothing. I think the Southport murders certainly were, kind of a catalyst for it, but even when it was revealed that the killer was a black Rwandan guy, it didn't stop the mobs going around targeting Muslims and every minority in sight. It's a very dangerous thing, so I do think that disinformation is not harmless. It's not harmless when innocent people are falsely accused of something. It's not harmless when it's inciting mob violence. So I am against censoring most things, but there are certain times that censorship is actually justified. I mean, take the Online Safety Act, for instance. I think it's probably gone too far and there's been too many examples of people being penalised over nothing. So I share the concern about that. But I think most decent people would agree that there should be some level of censorship, for example, to stop minors accessing adult content online. I mean, any reasonable person would see that that's something that should be considered. So, for example, parental controls. Well, parental controls are a form of censorship, essentially, because they are censoring what their children are seeing. But most people would say that's good censorship. So, I'm coming from the position that censorship, when we think of it in terms of totalitarian states, censoring critical opinions, that's a bad thing. But not all censorship is bad. But I just think disinformation, for me, that is as concerning to me as kind of Orwellian control. I've actually got 1984 beside me here. My girlfriend got me this for my birthday. It's an abridged version. I've got 1985 by Anthony Burgess. So that should make for good reading. But, I just... As a centrist, this gets into the partisan thing as well, because I try very hard to be consistent. A lot of people out there, I think, are blinded by partisan bias, so they just refuse to see any negative on their side. But the level of disinformation that's online is scary. And this is why I think Trump and Musk are so utterly contemptible, because they knowingly and willfully spread this. Donald Trump's Truth Social should be Lies Social. I mean, it's like cold is warm, white is black, day is night. Donald Trump's Truth Social is drenched with lies. And yet millions of people are taken in by that. Millions of people are taken in with what Elon Musk comes out with. Then on a smaller scale, you get all sorts of channels on YouTube. Most of them are a lot bigger than this. So, For me, it feels like a David and Goliath situation. I'm trying to be a voice of reason. I'm trying to say, look, people just need to be objective, step back a little bit. By all means, have opinions, but don't just believe everything you see online. People just need to calm down, and things are not as bad as as it can sometimes seem. I mean, in Britain, we are not living in a totalitarian state. We're living in a state which has problems that we cannot be complacent about. That's how I would describe it. But, I can make a video critical of Labour and Keir Starmer and know that I'm not going to get a Stasi-style knock on the door. So I just don't think hyperbole is helpful. Anyway, I'll leave it there. But I honestly think this is one of the biggest problems of the 21st century, and we've seen it in armed conflict as well, in the Syria war, in the Ukraine war. The level of disinformation on those conflicts was staggering. Even after the invasion of Ukraine, there were Russian bots and useful idiots in the West, literally after February the 24th, 2022, claiming that there was no invasion. So all the bloodied victims, all the refugees were all actors apparently. You had people shamefully trying to claim that the Butcher massacre didn't really happen. And the same thing happened in Syria. When Bashar Assad was raining barrel bombs on children, you had Russian bots and useful idiots in the West basically claiming it was all made up by the white helmets. There was one example of, they tried showing this picture of a little girl and they claimed that it was the same little girl in another location. That was debunked. When you actually looked into it, the angles were different and sometimes nuances required. The white helmets were vilified, even though they were essentially humanitarian workers. They were vilified as being ISIS terrorists. We see this in Gaza, where the Palestinian people are being dehumanized by ultra right-wing pro-Israelis claiming that there's no humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And the thing is, even though this is so adverse from the facts, when you tell a lie enough, people start believing it. It really, really concerns me, actually, the sheer level of disinformation that's out there. So in conclusion, I would say we can't know everything at once. It's important to look at different sources. That's why I look at both left-wing and right-wing sources. I buy newspapers that straddle both left and right because I'm trying to get coverage from both sides. Very often I disagree with the editorial line. Very often I'm reading it and think that's absurd. I totally disagree with that editorial stance. But the point is, because I'm not partisan, I do try and get both perspectives when I can. I'll be honest, there's times I don't want to hear certain viewpoints. I mean, I'm not going to listen to Putin rambling on about how the Ukrainians are Nazis, because it's a broken record. I know what Putin's going to come out with. I think of Steve Rosenberg, the BBC's Moscow correspondent. I have so much respect for that man. I mean, he must have, to be one of the leading British correspondents in Moscow at this time, I think you need to have real courage, because he would really have to, in Russia, it's a criminal offence to say the word war. So Steve Rosenberg has to tread very carefully. They could easily just pin something on him and claim that he's a spy. So when he asks questions, he asks some very good questions. I mean, he asked Dmitry Peskov, Putin's spokesman, recently about the fact that North Koreans could pose a threat to Ukraine. This was in response to Peskov claiming NATO was a threat to Russia. But for a Western journalist to ask those sort of questions in Moscow, I think takes real guts. I have huge respect for Steve Rosenberg. Those are the sort of people I listen to. I just don't... I think that there are people online who are just... take pride in spreading conspiracy theory nonsense. And so much of it is just toxic. When it is, for example, attacking survivors of some tragedy, it just... people just need to step back a little bit. I am not saying, by the way, I don't want to be misunderstood with this. I'm not saying you just need to believe mainstream media. I think it's healthy to question institutions, including mainstream media. I certainly would take issue with a lot of their biases. So, toxic, I hope you don't mind me name checking you here, but I know you have a big problem with mainstream media. Well, just to be clear, I agree with you. I understand where that cynicism comes from. But all I'm saying is that doesn't necessarily mean that independent sources are full of integrity, because that's not always the case. Anyway, I'll wrap this up. But I think it's one of the biggest problems of our times. And I don't have a problem with governments trying to do something about it. But then again, it's a balancing act. Because if they go too far, then they're accused of censorship. But we know that disinformation could directly lead to violence. That's exactly what happened last year. Disinformation was being spread on Telegram. So those who say that there should be absolutely no controls whatsoever, who literally advocate people can say whatever they want, they can make threats, they can incite violence, they can spread lies. My question to those people is, do you actually want to see violence on the streets? Do you want to see chaos? Because honestly, the way some of these people go on, you would think they actually want to see chaos and anarchy. And that's a very bleak outlook. So by all means, protest peacefully, criticize the government, upload videos, but just, for God's sake, people just need to step back a little bit. It's not all that bad. And not everything is some sinister plot by our overlords. People just need to step back a little bit. The disinformation that we're seeing, people pushing agendas, far right, far left agendas, it's just, I see it from both sides, and it is really, really, really toxic.